Hey everyone, I have something really special to share with you. I'm hosting my first ever virtual tarot conference this summer that I know you're going to love. It's called the Summer Solstice Summit, and it's happening the weekend of June 20th. It's going to be a 3-day online gathering filled with tarot, astrology, shadow work, creative ritual, and all things witchy wellness. I've brought together 15 incredible presenters, folks I truly admire, ranging from therapists who are using tarot therapeutically to psychologists, astrologers, and of course, some of the most innovative tarot thinkers. All of these folks will be leading workshops and presentations designed to nourish your spirit and deepen your tarot practice. So, whether you're new to using tarot, especially as a tool for self-discovery and healing, or if you've been on this path for years, this summit is meant to meet you exactly where you are. And everyone is guaranteed to walk away with some healing witchy wisdom. I hope you'll join us for the Summer Solstice Summit. Go ahead and visit thetarotdiagnosis.com/summer solstice to get your weekend pass. You are listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. I'm your host, Shannon. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I also happen to have a love for tarot. Each episode, I invite you to reflect with me as I work to demystify the tarot and the human experience, all while exploring tarot's connection to mental and emotional health. While this podcast may feel therapeutic, it is not meant to take the place of psychotherapy. So grab your cards and join me as I work to create a pathway to better understand ourselves and those around us. Hello, everyone. It's so good to be back recording a new episode of The Tarot Diagnosis. It's been a few weeks since I recorded an episode, mainly because there's just been so much happening in my world personally and professionally. And I don't normally do this on the podcast, but I suppose I can give you all a little bit of an update. If you follow me on social media, then you've already seen that I was just in Florida for a week. I was actually born and raised there and lived in the Tampa Bay area until I was 18. And then I started moving all over the United States for almost the next 10 years. And I did that before heading back to Tampa. And then I was there until about 2022. And then that's when I moved to Phoenix, Arizona. And if you follow me on Substack, you know that I recently started posting some stuff there. And you know that I've been struggling living in the desert. It's been really hard to adjust to life here. So it was really nice to be back home for a bit, despite being absolutely suffocated by the humidity. I did just revel in the ocean and getting to see the water everywhere, and I was touching the trees and I was just marveling over all the tropical plants and really just being so present and smelling all the salty air. It was really magical and I really needed it. I also got to spend a ton of time with my friends and family, which was also incredibly needed. It was honestly kind of an epic week of reminiscing, especially with my cousins, one of whom is actually he's a sound engineer and is the one who is responsible for doing this podcast and making it sound good. So shout out to Anthony. Thank you. But yeah, I got to spend time with my cousins and Anthony and Derek, which if you are on Instagram, you saw I posted a picture of them. Both of which I got into some crazy and fun stuff with as a teenager, which one day I would love to write about because we had a wild life as teenagers. That was probably not normal. We were very heavily in the local music scene, and I was a music journalist from age like 14 to 21, 22-ish. And yeah, there's a whole backstory to that. None of these PR people and how I was getting press passes to do these interviews knew that I was as young as I was. But yeah, it was wild. Even as a teenager, I was working for local publications. So the the local music scene coupled with then the national music scene because of doing all this music journalism stuff, especially in the early 2000s, you can, maybe only imagine that we have many stories. So yeah, it was just really nice to be able to be back with them and reminisce. And we were also able to experience a 2-day Metallica concert together. That was amazing and very special because my partner has some connections to the band. So we got to enjoy a very comfortable VIP Metallica experience. So shout out to everybody who made that happen. That was really, really incredible. And I greatly appreciated it because I cannot hang like I used to. And especially with it being an outdoor concert, it was very nice to be indoors for most of it. And then, we also got to go down and have seats and experience everything up close. So yeah, the week was just a very welcome reprieve, especially from, oh gosh, all the atrocities happening in the world right now that I know so many of us are feeling so deeply. And to be completely transparent, I've been having a really hard time focusing because of everything that's happening in the world. I'm sure you all can only imagine what it's like being a therapist in the midst of all of this, holding space for clients and also my friends and family and myself. It's difficult. And, I knew I wanted to record an episode today, but I ended up starting to experience that same feeling that I had mentioned in an Instagram post several months ago where my brain was like, what's the point? Like, why are you talking about this? Why does it matter? The world is crumbling. And yeah, I snapped out of that relatively quickly because I try to remind myself this is something that I can do for all of you and for myself because this feels good. It feels like a creative escape. And yeah, this is my offering to all of you in hopes that this podcast functions as your own reprieve and escape. So, what am I nerding out about today? Enough about me. I am actually really excited about today's episode because recently a listener had reached out and they asked me to talk about the difference between justice and judgment, which I was absolutely willing to do and very excited to nerd out about because I feel like they're two archetypes that especially newer readers can easily get mixed up or maybe not really understand kind of the nuanced differences between them. And, they're also two very timely archetypes given the state of the world we are in. So yeah, let's get into it. To start, I decided to read as much as I possibly could about judgment and justice. I have a whole stack of books where I was reading the author's interpretation of these two cards. And if you receive my email newsletter, when I post an episode, I send out an email talking about the episode and usually have spreads and photos in there. So you saw the photo of all the books that I read to prepare for this episode. And what I've come to synthesize is judgment is the catalyst of self-awareness, and justice channels that awareness into personal and relational and systemic transformation. And so to simplify that even further, judgment is to awareness as justice is to action. That's what I've discovered. And you know what? Maybe that's the episode. No, I'm just kidding. Now you get to hear me talk about how I came to that conclusion. I think these two cards can be difficult for folks to, one, sit with, and then two, really kind of like understand the difference between them for a few reasons. Now, you have to keep in mind I'm a psychotherapist, so my lens is psychological and behavioristic. So I'm thinking about this from right now, at least specifically through an internal family systems perspective. So in IFS, the self is defined as this inner presence of compassion, curiosity, calm, connectedness, and there's several other C words. It's called the 8 Cs. And when we're faced with kind of this metaphorical judgment sound, I'm thinking about the trumpet specifically, and this is where the discomfort comes in. It can sometimes feel or look like or remind us of like an alarm bell. And then that can trigger a lot of things within us. Like if we're looking at this specifically through an IFS lens, we have managers and exiles and firefighters. And so the critical managers are trying to kind of control the situation then. And then exiles are feeling a lot of shame. So they're trying to recoil. They don't want to be seen. And then the firefighters are really impulsive. So they're just doing whatever they can to quiet and stop any sort of discomfort caused by the awareness and the alarm bells that we can sometimes feel when we see this card. Now, this card isn't always about kind of feeling triggered by that. Often judgment is inviting us to sit down and kind of question, kind of what am I aware about myself? What am I not aware about myself? What's being exposed? What's not being exposed? What needs to heal? What's already been healed? Something else I discovered too is that we can understand judgment as a more balanced archetype, which still feels similar to justice, which again, this is probably why some people get thrown off. But judgment really promotes kind of a sense of evolution and a real emphasis on choosing kind of internal integrity. This isn't about discovering something about the self and then shaming it. It's really about integrity, integration, and assimilation. To go back to IFS terms, when the self is leading, so when that centered, calm, curious, connected, compassionate self is leading, then all of our parts are being informed and having a say. But when the parts of us are exiles are in control, then some of the other parts are retreating and we're not fully balanced. And the way I'm viewing judgment is kind of that centered self that is giving each part the opportunity to speak. So, and basically what I'm saying in more kind of simple terms is a balanced and healthy relationship and understanding of judgment means that we're able to discover and acknowledge something within and about ourselves, others, and the world, and notice it without any sort of intense shame or overt negativity. So again, judgment is more about awareness, this kind of like inner knowing. In fact, I really like how Paul Quinn in his book, Tarot for Life, talks about judgment. And he describes it not as an experience of being judged, despite the word judgment, but more as a kind of lifting out of our own judgmental consciousness. And when we're looking at the archetype through that lens, that's when judgment becomes less about condemnation and more about liberation. And we really see that energy in the card when we focus more on the people and less on the angel in the sky, because there really does feel like there's a sense of freedom and release, like release being the kind of the key word here, when we allow ourselves to kind of rise out of being entrapped by, these boxes, or these caskets, which, could represent being trapped by our inner critics. And when we're no longer being trapped by our inner critic, that's when we're allowed or giving ourselves permission really to move towards something more expansive, to experience the world through a different, more compassionate, wider lens. And even now, just kind of the way that I'm thinking about this, it really also feels similar to when we're doing shadow work, because we're really kind of encouraging ourselves to face the parts of us that maybe we don't want to. And then the whole goal is to integrate what we've discovered about ourselves so that we can feel more whole and more authentic. And, all of the imagery that we see in Judgment really does feel like it's encouraging us to step into authenticity. And then, we can even shift our view of the trumpet. I know at first I was talking about the trumpet kind of being a trigger for a lot of us, like, oh my God, it's so loud. What is it pointing out? And it could be viewed as kind of like this external notification. But we can also view it as an internal notification, because I think it's more appropriate to view the Judgment card through an internal perspective anyway. So in this case, if we're looking at it internally, the trumpet could then represent the inner voice really finding its footing and maybe taking over the inner critic. So kind of that inner self that I was talking about earlier, the calm, compassion, connected, curious part. And when we think about kind of like coming out of these caskets and really like into our authentic self, being able to acknowledge our inner critic and all of these parts of ourselves that are shadows, it really does kind of echo Carl Jung's concept of integration or individuation and assimilation, which is our lifelong journeys of work where we're seeking wholeness and authenticity and self-realization. I think in this case, Judgment really represents us kind of literally, because we see it in the card, these people rising out of these caskets, rising above, what has been holding them back, rising above their limitations and allowing themselves being invited really to experience and access a heightened state or a higher state of self-awareness, a higher state of consciousness. Yeah. And even just like thinking about it through that lens, I'm like, it kind of sounds like I'm talking about psychedelics. So maybe Judgment is also like the microdosing card if you're into that type of thing. Oh my God, I'm like trying not to go down a rabbit hole of like psychedelics now. Because I'm like, oh, look, they're all together. and the angel's like the sober friend, like making sure everybody's not tripping too hard. But yeah, and then, okay, so now we're talking about all the other people who are present. So not only is this a card about kind of individual awakening or individual awareness, but I think there's a collective component here. And I really enjoy that about this archetype because I think it reminds us that we're not alone on this journey, even though our journey is ours and ours alone. It can feel really isolating a lot of times. And so to seek people out who are having a shared experience like that is really important. Okay, so I kind of want to shift gears now and talk about justice, because I feel like I just talked a lot about Judgment. So now I want to talk about justice, and then we'll kind of like wrap it all together. So to look at the imagery of justice, we really tend to focus on the scales, which, it's a very prominent aspect of the card. It really represents kind of the key components of balance and equilibrium and fairness. But, the sword is also another prominent, important component too. And the sword is what represents truth and clarity and our ability to be clear and decisive and make morally fair and ethical decisions. When we think about justice through a therapeutic lens, I feel like it really represents our ability to speak our truth and do so in a way that is also cognizant of our boundaries, the boundaries of others. And to go back to the scales, our ability to also reconcile the fact that we often have conflicting needs and wants and thoughts and desires. So when we think of the scale, I automatically think of dialectical behavior therapy because it looks like it's balancing or could be balancing our logical mind and our emotional mind. And then we could say that the figure in the middle would represent the wise mind. So if you've been around the tarot diagnosis for a while, one of my favorite spreads is a dialectical behavior therapy spread, and it's called the Wise Mind. And it essentially functions as a Venn diagram. So on one side of the Venn diagram, we have the logical mind. And then on the other side of the Venn diagram, we have our emotional mind. And then that overlapping space in the middle is the wise mind, which I just feel is so clearly represented in the Justice card. This person holding the scale, holding the logical mind and the emotional mind, and then trying to reconcile that and figure out what is this kind of happy medium between the two. Another avenue I tend to take when thinking about justice, especially a therapeutic avenue, I think about agency, personal agency, collective agency, because it's such a core principle of therapy and the therapeutic experience and the therapeutic relationship. And this idea of fostering agency is the belief that we have some sort of power and control over our lives. And justice really embodies this principle because it's a card that can reflect the outcomes of past decisions and actions. And then we can continue that dialectical behavior connection that I was talking about earlier, because this card could also represent the action part of radical acceptance. And so radical acceptance being, that we acknowledge that we cannot change the past, kind of what's done is done, but we can choose how we respond now. And that's where our power, and that's really where our agency lies. So justice doesn't, or justice, neither justice nor judgment are casting blame. When we pull these cards, these aren't cards about blame. They're more about invitations to kind of own up to our decisions and take responsibility, justice specifically. And not in a burdensome sense, but really just as a catalyst for transformational change. I think the justice card specifically can really help us kind of look at and edit narratives and help us shift into a space of empowerment, especially, if we kind of embody that radical acceptance dialogue that, yes, this thing happened to me and I'm not powerless to affect what comes next, essentially. As I'm talking about these two, hopefully you can kind of start to see how that statement I made at the very beginning of the episode is beginning to take shape about how judgment is awareness and justice is action. And, to kind of like further drive that home, I think it was Benabel Wen who spoke about judgment being kind of this interior waypoint, so to speak, and then justice being this kind of like outward threshold. I think to simplify that, we could say justice is external and judgment is internal. And I think the more I read about these two cards and I reflect on them, I realize how much they work in tandem. Judgment kind of breathes into justice. We have this deep self-awareness, deep kind of self-driven insight of judgment that is really inspiring this external action and external accountability of justice, which I think creates this kind of constant flow between the two of them. I kind of want to do something different now and kind of interesting. I don't know how this is going to work, but you know what? We're just going to experiment and see what happens. But I kind of want to pull a card for how are judgment and justice similar, and then pull a card for how are they different, just to see what happens and to see what tarot has to say about these two cards. So yeah, if you have a deck nearby, grab it. And I would love for you to pull alongside me. And then also I would love to hear what you guys end up pulling and what comes up for you. So yeah, let's pull a card for how are judgment and justice similar? And then how are they different? Okay. Oh, that's funny. Okay, so how are they similar? I pulled the Emperor, which I feel like is so fitting. It makes me immediately think about how they both seek to establish some sort of order and control. For Judgment, it seems like more like internal control, and Justice, external control. Both are highly engaged in decisive energy, which feels very Emperor-like. And okay, so in what ways are they different? I pulled the Queen of Pentacles, which this one is not as evident to me as the Emperor. As soon as I pulled the Emperor, I was like, oh yeah, I know exactly what this card is saying. But I honestly, I feel a little stumped with the Queen of Pentacles. I know I view the Queen of Pentacles obviously as being, rooted in the material world, very nurturing. She's very grounded, very supportive, also very practical because she's a pentacle, which I think that feels more aligned with Justice, because especially Justice feels more like the here and now in the way that the Queen of Pentacles feels like the here and now. And Judgment is kind of less grounded and more, I don't like to use the word divine, but like divine, ethereal, like kind of like not tangible. It's more about this inner knowing. Yeah. Not to say that Justice is always tangible, but if Judgment is awareness, that's not something that is kind of externally seen. It's something that's more felt. And if Justice is action, that is often seen. And then the Pentacles are more about outcomes and experiencing kind of like cause and effect. I don't know, I might be rambling a bit with this one, but you're getting this real-time view into how my brain is processing this. This is good though. I like a good challenge, and this is the whole point. Tarot is a thought exercise. We are collectively exercising our brains with this one. But I think, like Justice, the Queen of Pentacles is dependable and also balanced. She's a very balanced presence, a balanced, reliable, responsible presence. However, unlike Judgment, the Queen of Pentacles, I don't see her as like engaging in that like deep kind of soul level reckoning or spiritual transformation that Judgment would represent. So yeah, that's my take on that. That was fun. I'm glad I ended up doing that. I wasn't really sure what was going to happen with that, but I enjoyed that challenge. And I honestly would love to hear what your take is on this. Would you say something different about the Emperor? Would you say something different about the Queen of Pentacles? So thanks to the listener who suggested this. This was super fun. And if you're listening and you also have something that you want me to explore on the podcast, you can always send an email to thetarotdiagnosis@gmail.com, or you can visit thetarotdiagnosis.com. Thank you so much for listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. For more tarot and mental health content, follow The Tarot Diagnosis on Instagram. You can also subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, and sign up to receive the Tarot Diagnosis emails, where you'll have access to exclusive spreads and exciting announcements. To join an incredible community of tarot and psychology enthusiasts, join the Tarot Diagnosis membership community, The Symposium, by visiting thetarotdiagnosis.com.